All right, so we're continuing from our previous podcast on what we were talking about. Oh, who's your main? I'm here once again with Anthony. It is Thursday for us, and we're continuing the thoughts. And we're still sick, but we're continuing the thoughts on what we were talking about. Who's your main? But we didn't get to talk about the main things that different between me and Anthony. And his thing is he played a lot more sports games than I did, and I kind of leaned more into the RPGs. So we're gonna try to talk here a little bit about sports games, but just to get us started, the only sports game, let's be honest, the only sports games I played were like Mario games, Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, and you can get into who's your main with Mario Tennis. But some of the first games that I played that were sports games were on the Super Nintendo, unless you want to count the track and field game on the NES. But I played a college football game where you could make your own team, but we did not understand how to play football. So that's not really a good example from me. But the other game that the main sports game that became the game that me and my brothers played together and against each other was this hockey game, Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey on the N64. Incredibly fun, like arcade hockey game. But I think the branch between me and you, Anthony, is NBA Jam. And I played that on the Super Nintendo. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how people pick teams and why they pick them.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think, kind of what we were talking about with the fighting game archetypes and scrolling through the character list and be like, oh, this guy looks cool. I think you can kind of get that in a sense with sports teams, the sports games of that era. And it's actually really funny. You mentioned the Nintendo suite of games, Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, Mario Baseball. Those are some of the deepest sports games of all time. People still play, obviously very pocket leagues of modded versions of the games you can play online. But yeah, I think just as much as you could say I like really big dudes on fighting games, you can also say the exact same thing about sports. If I'm playing a basketball game, do you want to play NBA Jam? Do I want to play as a center who's 7 foot tall and I can block shots and grab rebounds and I'm dunking it and smashing the rim and all of that stuff? Or do I want to be a little guard who's running around passing and shooting and I can shoot the ball from half court and it goes in, and that's kind of my power fantasy. You still have that same dynamic. Now instead of the realm of fantasy, it's more in the realm of sports and action and, realism. And like you said, NBA Jam, I think that it does a really good job of having that, whether it's what team are you kind of works the same way as what main are you, whether that's, well, I'm from in a certain state or something like that, and so that's the team I'm going to pick. I have loyalty to my nation, if it's a fantasy world, or I have loyalty to a certain player or a certain player archetype. So I really feel that. I think the sports games for me, I always tended to gravitate more towards the speed, the athleticism, the natural athletes, Michael Jordan's, Kobe Bryant, stuff like that, kind of the poster boys, the ones that always stood out to me. Like you said, those older games, I had a Sega Genesis hockey game, and it's the most fantastic sports game I think I've ever played in my entire life, where I think we've all seen old school NHL 94, kind of that top-down view of hockey players that are gliding around the ice like Supermen, and there's just no control because nobody has any control. Well, this game, when you would go to like check, it would bring it into a cutscene, almost like a Resident Evil cutscene, where this guy would just bash into the other guy, and then it would return to the normal view like nothing had happened. Or you'd go to take a slap shot, and the camera would zoom in, and it's this really dynamic, obviously nothing's moving, but this dynamic power shot that's just like lasering into the net. It's so cool.
I know we've talked about it briefly before, and I kind of want to just spend some time here thinking about it, or mostly just you yammering more about it. What were some of the good sports games that I didn't play? We were talking about the ones I played, but let's talk more about the ones that you played that I never heard of that you enjoyed. Which games did you get into and play?
Sure, yeah. You kind of alluded to this a little bit. There's basically two styles of sports games. There's kind of the arcadey, fun, couch co-op games where the point of the game isn't to create a realistic sports game. It's to create a fun sports game. And then there's much more of the sim style of games. I gravitate towards the sim style. I love taking teams and rebuilding them. And your brother and I actually, he introduced me to hockey, and I think that would probably be a really good one to start at. Is just NHL series of games. He introduced me to hockey. I believe it was back in NHL 14 or 16, and I had never played hockey. I didn't even know the rules to hockey. And we both picked up teams and just did a fantasy draft and made teams out of players. I picked my team based on this is how little I knew about the league. I didn't know who any of the players were. So I just went through and picked all of the brothers and put them on one line. And then the last line, the fourth line, I just picked anybody that had a mustache, and that was my mustache line. So knowing nothing about the sport, I was still able to compete and have fun and play. As far as games that really stood out in my mind as very, very fun, I think some of the best football games I ever played were on the PlayStation 2, whether it was the NCAA college football series, where I think some of the most fun about that was obviously I'm playing against another person, but you could create signs for the fans in the stadium to hold up. So if I'm playing against you, I could make a sign that says like Jared sucks, and you're driving down the field getting ready to score on me, and one of the fans holds up a sign that just says Jared sucks. And that to me was hilarious. Kind of that pulling you out of it's like, hey, wait a minute, what the heck? But yeah, for me, really I played every single sport and every single sports game, I think probably on every console that I've owned.
You know, we had some pretty epic battles in the first Mario Tennis game. Me and I don't really know why I picked the tennis player that I picked at the time. I think I would have rather have mained Boo, but my main was Daisy. I don't know why. And my younger brother, he gravitated towards power characters before I think he really realized his real strength was mix-up. But he would play Donkey Kong in that game, and it always came down. Most of the games in the house always came down between me and him, mostly because we were the most passionate, I think probably the most passionate gamers in the house. But he and I would always just go 20 rounds, 40 rounds, 20 to 20. And it was always like that. We would always break the other two brothers and they would leave, and we would just stay there until one of us won and then continue. Tennis is probably the only game that I really remember playing really well, unless you want to count the golf games, which I don't know if I count them. It's almost more of a cosmetic thing in golf games. You just got to pick the right, I don't know, maybe I guess there's power hitters and good hitters, I don't know. But the main thing that I was thinking about was sports games, which, okay, so my experience with understanding sports really came into view for me when you guys sucked me into Blood Bowl 2. And I realized that's a tabletop game that then became this video game. But I never really understood sports until I played that game, and we had done that 8-week series. So I don't know.
So just really quick to get anybody caught up who doesn't know what Warhammer is. I didn't know what it was, and I kind of stumbled on it by accident. So if you're familiar with the Warhammer fantasy line, it's in that universe, and the kind of elevator pitch of the game is it's these humans and I believe orcs are fighting a massive war, a planetary-sized war, and the entire fighting comes to a stop because they come to a giant cathedral, so big and so impressive that both sides stop fighting. And they both kind of walk in together into this giant temple, this giant cathedral, and inside is a Bible, a holy text of rules of this ancient game that used to be played. And they crack open the book, and the god, the deity, is Nuffle, NFL. And so it's literally Space Marine football, where you kick off to the other team, drive it down the field, and try to score. And yeah, I absolutely love it. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of sports games, so any chance to get my friend group to play sports games, I'm kind of the more sports inclined one, and I just absolutely love the races in that game. Gravitating towards the Skaven, the quick, fast, very I guess expendable characters, and then the Nurgle faction, the undead, kind of gross, sopping, disgusting worshippers of death.
And once again, I would have guessed that.
Yeah.
By looking at the available teams, just like you would have guessed that I'd play the orcs and the undead. But what a great combination of concepts that game held for us, as you really like sports games, wanted us to play sports games, and I'm always trying to get us to play freaking MMOs or fantasy games. And when you introduced it to me, you were like, look, do you want to play this fantasy game where you get to be orcs and stuff? I mean, I think you even said that, like, you could be the orcs. Well, I guess if you want.
Yeah.
That does sound fun. And what was really great about that game is it's a turn-based game, which is really weird for a sports game. Most sports games are not turn-based. They are real-time and reactionary because, I mean, they're sports. But this game was more of a strategy game where you had to come up with your own plays, and that's where the creativity really shines in that game, is building your team and the stats and paying attention. And that's where that crossover that I never really realized was there with, well, in tabletop fantasy terms, I'm like min-max, and you're over there and they're like, no, this is just how we do stat blocks and understanding stat analytics or whatever kind of big sports terms you use. So I was like, wow, I do like sports. And now when I watch football in real life, I'm like, should have used a super cage on them. So we would like name our plays and name our players. Oh man, what an experience that was.
I think that to me is what made the league so fun. Was we made our character. You make your team, you name your team, and then you bring them together against your team. Your friends' teams, your opponents' teams. But we really embraced the idea of this is our league. These are our characters. There's storylines. There's role play. Even though, like you said, it's a turn-based sports game. There really is no, for all intents and purposes, there is no action, right? Because I know as soon as the dice are rolled, I'm going to block you or knock you down, or a character can die in the moment. Those were the things that were so exciting. You killing my rat ogre, I think, was one of the highlights of the entire season, where it's just like, no. And it's like, there's no animosity, there's no anger there. It's just, I was getting ready to make a giant play, and then you made a giant play, and there's no, it was the story of it, the giant rat ogre being felled by, I think it was the orcs that killed him, or maybe it was the undead that killed him, but it was just such an incredible, obviously we named all of our characters, and we pulled from our D&D groups to name some of them. The MVP of the league was a goblin named Stinkbutt, the greatest player of them all. And like you said, I'm terrible about this. I'm such an analytical person, and I'm so hyper focused on that stuff. I created a Google spreadsheet for KPIs and trying to figure out all of that stuff. And Stinkbutt, I believe when I checked it, he was the only person to not drop a single kickoff the entire year. I mean, just like absolutely stupid stats that don't matter. And we were just sitting there relishing them and talking about them, just like we're old football heads talking about, like the 1970s Chargers or something like that.
I would love to sit down and see if we can go. Well, technically, those games are recorded, so it'd be really fun to make a video of us talking over them and reminiscing about that time. It was very fun. The league consisted of myself, my younger brother, and Anthony, and it was an extremely fun experience. But just like giving us all that freedom of expression with the teams, you picked your team motto, you picked your colors, you picked your patterns, and then you would name the characters, and then the freedom of expression of how to play. Like, yes, I played the orcs and they're good at bashing, but how did I play them in bashing? Or how did you play your Nurgle team? Or how did you play your Skaven team? And I think that's kind of furthering that concept and those thoughts about those expressions. And the real thing that we really want to get into here, I think, is just talking about strategy games and games because now we've moved from basically real-time strategy of fighting games, and now we're kind of moving into the turn-based things that got us here. By the time we're playing Blood Bowl, I mean, we've had all these experiences that had led up to that. But there's one that you and I share, and I'm just going to rewind the clock all the way back to Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation 1, War of the Lions, and talk about building a team in any way that you want. That was the first time that I really had that experience of you choose the characters that are on the screen, you choose what classes they are, how those subclasses work, this was even before we started playing Dungeons and Dragons for me. So like the concept of fighters and rogues and mages and all that stuff came from Final Fantasy for me. To have that kind of like mentality of the strategy of Final Fantasy Tactics and the grid-based system, and then bring it all the way into a sports game, I think blew me away. I was like, what the fuck is going on with this game? I mean, I dumped hours into it after I bought it and started playing it. I was like, nope, I'm playing this game with the boys. This is what the hell?
I think for me, the great satisfaction, obviously I'm a high school football coach. I love, researching more about that topic. I love learning about the ever evolving strategies and all of that stuff. Playing Blood Bowl with you guys was some of the most stressful and chaotic moments of strategy. There's a popular strategy known as caging, which you employed to great effect with the orcs. But then, obviously all strategies have a weakness. I was able to find a weakness in the cage and stop it. And you countered that with what I believe you termed the super cage, where you just took every living body on the field and mashed them into a giant ball and just wrecked down the center of the field. Just try to stop me. We're not either the time's going to run out or we score, whatever you want to have happen.
We don't care. We just want to hold the ball because normally it's too slippery with blood. I just loved that series. I would love to sit here and talk more and more about it, but I kind of want to move into our experiences with just like team building or building things in games and how much time you and I actually spent. I mean, there is a lot of crossover with that for us, is you and I both enjoy the same kind of concepts of sitting there and fiddling with stuff to get it to work. And like maybe just like when you're playing like a football game, I'll be sitting there playing just any kind of fantasy game, sitting there trying to fiddle, like move this magic item over here, or move this stat block to this one. Maybe that'll work. Maybe if I took 3 instead of 4 of this class, it'll work.
Yeah, I think video games are one of the very few, I guess I don't even really know how to describe it, like where you can combine theory crafting with putting it into place. Obviously every game has a meta, and this is what you should do, and this is what is best, quote unquote. Those things are only there because they're working now. The counter is out there. The way to beat that is out there. And so not only do you have the counter to the meta, but you have the counter to the counter. And so there's just all of these things that go into play. You had mentioned it. You and I love that idea of just sitting down and tinkering with our builds and thinking what would happen if we move one thing over here, move another thing over there. I think really, I'm looking at the list of games that you've got on here to talk about. I think this is really the genre and the series of games where I really kind of started to shift my focus and really started to get into that mindset of, it sounds bad when I say it like this, how do I break the game? How do I win in a non-traditional way? How do I make the game do what I want to do as opposed to conforming to the rules of the game? And so I think that this is kind of the part in my gaming career where there's kind of a shift in focus, and it really, for all intents and purposes, really started to go downhill for me.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk, obviously the first game on that list is Final Fantasy Tactics. I've already mentioned it once, but I'd never played a game like that. And maybe that means I'm a little sheltered because obviously Dragon Quest III existed before Final Fantasy Tactics. In Dragon Quest III, you could really build whatever you wanted. It was for a 4-man fighting team, as far as games that were available here in the U.S., that game was doing it. I mean, we're talking about the forefathers of that type of genre, but little did I know that D&D was doing that prior to that, and maybe some other games too, but this is just the ones that we were playing, and I did end up playing Dragon Quest III on the Game Boy Color after Final Fantasy Tactics, but I remember dumping hours into thinking about like, oh man, I didn't know, but if I take ninja, I can get dual wield and put it on a monk, and then they can dual wield fists, quote unquote, and just beat the shit out of people. Like those kind of simple little, and like you and I do this all the time when we play games. We find those meta builds without looking them up because we're trying to do a blind playthrough. And then we're like, damn it. Now we got to move into a different build because this is too good and I want a challenge.
Well, yeah, I think the other thing too that you and I both have realized is not only do we want to experiment with our builds, but we want to change our builds all of the time. You're talking about that monk build. I think I built that that in Final Fantasy Tactics probably 30 different ways, 30 different times, and it's still fun for me.
Oh, yeah. And just, I feel like if everybody played Final Fantasy Tactics, everybody would have their own team, and it would be totally different every time. But like you said, maybe we all have a monk, but they don't all have the same move sets. And I think that that's really fun. But this concept of this meta and stuff, again, that kind of stuff didn't really come around until later for us. I don't know if it was being talked about on the internet back in the days of game FAQs and other forums. I wasn't old enough, and nor did I have a good enough internet access to be jumping on forums and reading what other people are doing in video games. The best thing that we had was meet at school and ask what people did to beat a certain boss. So I don't know. Like Final Fantasy VII had I think that was a really good game for expression in an RPG. The materia system was robust. You could do what you wanted. You could have Cloud take a bunch of magic, or you could have Cloud take a bunch of, or magic attacks, I should say, or you could have Cloud take a bunch of healing magic, and you could essentially build your characters to fight how you wanted. But like you said, the inevitable jank would show up, and that's where I think old RPG games, they knew that player existed, and that idea is not new. Heck, Dragon Quest III had the Gadabout, or the Joker, or whatever they call it now. This character that would just do random stuff during the fight. And it was not optimal, but it really shook up how the game played, which was really fun. So enemy skill, blue mages, and stuff like that, I always found myself gravitating towards that chaos element that maybe others wanted to avoid. You wanted to have more control over the dice. I think that's why we liked Blood Bowl, is just that lack of control over, like, we're going to do this, but the dice has fucked you. Again, great. Oh, good.
Especially for me, Final Fantasy VII, I think, was the first time. I guess I should say it this way. When I was playing Pokemon as a kid, my characters all had 4 attack moves, right? And it might be a fire move, a lightning move, and whatever. Try to get my type coverages. But I was 4 attack all the way. Final Fantasy VII was the first time where I was really like, wait, it's actually way stronger to have all of these buffs, debuffs, mime. I'm going to do a quad cast of Knights of the Round, and then I'm going to mime 4 times mime it. So now I've got 16 versions of a 15-minute long cutscene playing. I just set my controller down and go get a snack. I mean, that's the first time where I really felt like I was all powerful, broke the game and all of that stuff. But yeah, I agree with you. I think we never really grew up in that world of looking at tier lists or looking at frame data or anything like that. That just wasn't really in our scope of, like our wheelhouse of how we get better at the game. I think for us, it was much more about muscle memory, about playing it, about practicing it, about doing it. And then, like I said, I think maybe another large part of that too was just the idea of, I don't want to make the game so easy that I can just barrel through it.
How dare you bring up the P word in this Pokemon?
Oh, wait. Oops.
Now we're going to have to talk about Pokemon. I'm just kidding. I don't want to spend a bunch of time on Pokemon tonight, but I don't know. You're talking about Final Fantasy VII. All I can think of is how there's a difference between Final Fantasy games and Final Fantasy International games, and how Knights of the Round was really only added into the quote-unquote international version. And it still always blows my mind. But talking about buffs and debuffs and all attack or no attack, I think everybody took that Charizard to level 70 by the time you made it to Blaine's gym and were taking down fire-type Pokemon with your flamethrower. At some point, you start to get interested in those other spells and those other abilities in those games that do blind or do paralyze. And I can remember, I know we've talked about it before, because I can't not ever mention it, and that's Grandai 2, which I had it on the PlayStation 2, but I'm pretty sure it was a Dreamcast game. And I think I was talking to you about that last night when we were chatting about this concept, and I was like, we need to turn this into a podcast. That was the first game that I had played. I'd gotten stuck. First game I played that had ever done this, what I was going to talk about. I'd gotten stuck at a boss, and it's a very, very iconic boss for me. I can't remember the name of it, but I know it had eyes floating around. And I was stuck there, and I'd brute forced my way up to this boss by this point in the game, because at least during regular enemy encounters, I was utilizing the debuffs and the blinds and things like that, and then buffing the crap out of my team as well, because I'd always played all these Final Fantasy games. Most of the time, bosses were immune to these status effects. So I'd just gotten to where brute force and healing was the only way, and you were just eventually stopped trying to do those other moves because it didn't work. And so I was stuck on this boss, and I couldn't beat him, and a friend came over, and he tried to do it, and he couldn't do it. My older brother tried to do it, he couldn't do it, and I was very frustrated because I was really enjoying the story in this game. And finally, just on a whim, I was trying the boss again, and I decided to debuff it, and it worked, and I was like, this is an incredible interaction here. Like, I'm being forced to upkeep debuffs on this boss, a concept that then comes into play later in MMOs and things, and it was just a great feeling. It was really fun. All of a sudden, I had to think about all these different aspects of the fight again, and it wasn't just healing and trying to out-heal and out-damage the boss. It became this game of strategy, and it was much more fun and much more interesting to me, and obviously, I took that concept and went back into other games like Pokemon and like Final Fantasy. Of course, it didn't always work in Final Fantasy, but it was just a really fun way to interact with the game. But that I don't remember if that game really had complex team building. I don't remember. I was more interested in the story. I need to go back and play it.
I think we talked about this back in the fighting game portion of this, but debuffing and buffing is kind of like offense and defense in a fighting game, right? If it's fun to play defense in a fighting game, the fighting game is fun. If it's fun to debuff, then the strategy game is fun. That's kind of my, very broad, very, very basic take. Because in every game, you can buff yourself, right? Every game has some kind of a haste mechanic, has some kind of a bravery mechanic, some kind of a faith mechanic, whatever you want to call it. I think if you can debuff the opponent, every opponent, including the bosses, that makes a much more compelling and much more engaging fight, like you said.
Now I'm leaving out games because they no longer are in our current topic. Moving forward to a modern game that a lot of people have now got a taste of is the CRPG Baldur's Gate 3. And you and I were playing that last night and doing the... Unfortunately for the NPCs, it feels like a war crime the way that you and I play together, because those concepts of debuffing and defense, we've exploited all the way. And when we first started playing this game together, this is Anthony's first time through, I was like, we better just play balanced. He'd never played this before. And now I'm sitting there going, maybe we should have done Tactician. Whoops, forgot.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. You have the forever DM mixed with the min-maxer, the guy who theory crafts, and essentially we're always prepared for every situation in multiple different ways. We have every spell imaginable that you could want. And I believe we were fighting a devil and his cronies, and you essentially one-shot the devil, and then all of we were literally spike growthing, and cloud kill, or not cloud kill. What was it? Stinking cloud on top of it, to the point where the NPCs in the game were either passing their turn and doing nothing, or climbing on boxes and trying to escape.
I do wish that we had recorded it. Half the time I'm just like, I wish we were recording us playing this game together, because this is comedy gold, what's happening on the screen. But moving back to some of those thoughts about self-expression through games and who's your main and things. Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, name your TTRPG that you want, or even throw in Magic the Gathering. Like, those games really offer a really fantastic sense of creative self-expression through their systems and games. And I mean, taking it down to the base element there, as far as the TTRPGs, one of my favorite things when I'm a GM, we're talking about GMing, and I'm our group's forever GM. My favorite question to ask people when they bring up D&D is, what class do you play? What kind of, are you good? Are you bad? What are your favorite? What's your power fantasy? And really, that who's your main thing comes down to a power fantasy. What is your power fantasy? What is it that you want to do? I mean, just tell me your power fantasy here for anybody listening, so they get to know you a little more, because this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Baldur's Gate character that I'm playing is also a continuation of a long-standing Dungeons and Dragons character that I've been playing. Amon, he is a devil who is constantly using disguise self to take whatever form, shape, voice, whatever have you to get whatever advantage he can have. I believe right now he has somewhere in the vicinity of like 7 boons constantly at all times, always up and always on. I'll take the boon is the elevator pitch of my character. That's his response to everything is I'll take the boon. Yeah, I think when it comes to being the bit, I mentioned this earlier. When it comes to would you rather be the big, strong, bashy guy, or would you rather be the the smarmy, smart aleck who talks his way out of things? I'd rather be the jack of all trades, master of also all of the trades.
I would definitely throw you into the rogue caster.
Yeah.
Here's the 3 top guys. There's fighter, rogue type, and then caster type, and then we break off from there. But you've got the marriage of rogue and caster there. That's really fun. I think if you find yourself to be like me, when I was a little kid playing games with my brothers, I always ended up being the bad guy so that we had a bad guy. The other thing that I liked to do was have all the powers. I'm the most powerful. You can't defeat me because I have all the powers, If you find yourself saying that, or maybe you were young and you thought that and then you kind of not thought about it since, you'd make a great GM. You like having all the control and all the power. You're not going to get that as a player. You're not going to get that as someone who has to hyper focus down because that's all you're allowed to do within the rule set. Well, if you're the GM, you are everything. So I think that's why I found myself in that role, as I liked to be like that. And I always find it very constricting to be a player. And I think that when you took over GMing there for a while, you recognized that in me because I had no idea what to do. And you were like, why don't you have 2 characters? You could switch between them.
Yep.
Oh, thanks. Actually, that's making me feel a lot better about my situation.
I think the crowning moment for me was when I'd say probably about 2/3 through our campaign, you just said, wait a minute, let me look at your character sheet.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was just so completely, obviously I lied to the party about what my race was, what my class was, in a very friendly and within the confines of the game. I wasn't, trying to trick anybody I was, but trying to, screw anybody over. I like things my way. And rather than playing the bog standard class, I preferred to make my own class and through a combination of multi-classing.
What really bothered me about that moment when we played that, I feel like there's a lot of context missing here for people listening, but I always trusted Anthony to pick his character. I would say, hey, what are you going to play? And he was one of my most trusted players. Well, what are you going to play? He told me, I'm going to play a druid. I said, okay, that sounds good. You go ahead and build that and we'll meet and we'll start playing. And then, we sat down to play and we were playing and you kept doing stuff. And I was like, druids can't do that. I was like, wait, just a minute. Hand that character sheet over here. Normally I check character sheets prior, but we were just on a roll then and come down to look at your character sheet. I'm like, this is just a necromancer with more steps. What the hell? No, it's not.
I may or may not enjoy playing every flavor of necromancer available in every single game.
That tells us a lot about you, in my opinion.
Yeah. Again, I'll play the bad guy. I'll play the smarmy guy. I said it last night. The best way to describe every character I've ever made is every character that I make is Megamind with whatever hat on that you want him to be for that campaign.
Well, I think we've kind of talked about this topic for long enough. I think I've been keeping an eye on our time, so I think we'll wrap it up here. We might have some more to talk about ourselves, which we might go ahead and just keep recording here and go on to the next. But I think I'm not really sure what we're about to talk about next, but I'm not really done with the concepts here, and we've left off some games that I wanted to mention, and I think we're just going to jump into that. So I think we'll see you next time if you're listening. Go ahead and go to the next episode if you've been binging.